I'm going to tell you about a moment so small, so quiet, that at the time I didn't even know it was happening. No fanfare, no dramatic crescendo. Just a Tuesday afternoon in a deli on the Upper West Side when I was 37 years old, and had already started to believe the lie that I'd made it. That moment didn't change my career. It changed something deeper. It changed how I understood the relationship between ambition and compassion, between the person I was trying to become and the person I actually was. And honestly, that shift mattered more than any audition or award ever could. Let me back up. By 2007, Game of Thrones was still years away from airing. I was doing theater again, bouncing between small productions, picking up guest spots on television, shows where my name appeared so small in the credits that my own mother had to squint to find it. There was this weird limbo I was living in. I had industry people starting to recognize me, starting to take meetings, but not enough momentum to feel secure. I was making decent money, enough that I'd moved out of Williamsburg to a proper apartment with the bathtub in the actual bathroom, which felt like a luxury I didn't deserve. But I was also terrified every single day, terrified that the momentum would stop, terrified that I'd been lucky and luck runs out, terrified that everyone who'd ever believed in me would eventually see through whatever I was doing. Realized I was just a guy no different from the hundreds of other guys trying to make it in this city. So I was in this defensive crouch, still suspicious of people's kindness, still interpreting compliments as consolation prizes. If a casting director said, "You're really talented," my brain would immediately translate it to, "For someone like you." I was living in a state of constant low anger, not anything specific, just this simmering resentment toward the world for not making it easier, and toward myself for not being grateful enough that it was happening at all. I was ungracious. I was brittle. I was the kind of person who'd snap at a waiter over a small mistake because I needed to assert that I mattered, that I had authority over something, even if it was just a daily order. I remember exactly what I ordered that day. Turkey sandwich, no mayo, extra tomato. I was on my way to an audition for a play, some modern adaptation of Chekhov that I wasn't even that interested in. I was just going through the motions audition, callback, hope, rejection, repeat. It was the machinery of it that kept me going, not any real belief that something transformative was about to happen. I was in survival mode, disguised as ambition. The deli was crowded the way they always are around lunch. I'm standing in line, mentally rehearsing my lines, not really present in my body. And I notice this older woman, a couple of people ahead of me. She was probably in her 70s, tiny, with this careful way of moving that suggested her body had been demanding respect from her for a long time. She had a medical alert bracelet and trimmers in her hands. She ordered a small soup and a half sandwich, and her voice was so quiet that the guy behind the counter had to ask her 3 times to repeat it. Each time she did, a little more light seemed to go out of her eyes, like each repetition was confirmation of something she'd been suspecting about herself. Then she asked about the price. The total came to $9.47. She opened her purse and started counting out coins. Quarters, dimes, nickels, literally counting coins at a deli counter. And I could see her doing the math in her head, could see her fingers working through the arithmetic, and I realized she was trying to figure out if she had enough money for lunch. She probably did. The final amount was less than $10, but the fact that she had to wonder, the fact that she was standing there in public doing arithmetic to determine if she could afford soup, she came up short by $1.73. She started putting things back. First the sandwich, then the soup, asking if she could just get the crackers instead. The crackers were $1.50. The guy behind the counter, he was nice about it, but there was this visible shift in his attention. She wasn't a customer anymore. She was a problem to be efficiently. She stood there holding a package of crackers that cost $1.50, and I watched something happen on her face that I've never forgotten. It was like she'd finally accepted something she'd been fighting her whole life. Some truth about her place in the world that she'd been arguing against for decades. And now at 70-something waiting to buy lunch, she was admitting defeat to it. I don't know why I did what I came next. It wasn't charitable. It wasn't even conscious exactly. I stepped forward and told the guy to ring up the soup and the sandwich. I told him to add it to my order. The woman looked at me, and her face did this thing I wasn't expecting. She didn't look grateful exactly. She looked shocked. Shocked that a stranger would do something for her without an ulterior motive. Shocked that she rated that kind of basic human attention. And then she said something, just one sentence. She said, "You must be a kind person." Not "thank you." Not "that's generous." She said, "You must be a kind person." Like she was stating a fact about me that she could now confirm. Like kindness was something you could measure in real time by what you did when nobody was watching and the cost to you was minimal. I paid for both orders. She took a soup and sandwich, and as she left, she touched my arm. Just barely. Just for a second. She didn't say anything else. She just touched my arm and walked out into the afternoon. And I stood there, holding my sandwich, and something broke open in me. Not in a good way, exactly. It was more like a confrontation. I'd been so focused on being seen as talented, as worthy, as deserving of a place at the table, that I'd somehow convinced myself that the point of survival was to eventually get enough power that you never had to be vulnerable again. That if I could just make it big enough, succeed loud enough, then I could build a wall between myself and the uncertainty, between myself and the knowledge that I was just another person doing the best they could with what they had. But this woman, this stranger, with the medical alert bracelet and the tremoring hands and the $1.50 crackers budget, she'd just shown me something. She'd shown me that I was already standing on the other side of a line I was trying to cross, that I already had things she didn't have, that the privilege I was fighting for wasn't actually about being finally and fully safe. It was about the space between people. It was about the possibility of being kind when you had no incentive to be. It was about recognizing that we're all just trying not to disappear. I sat down on a bench outside the deli and actually cried, not quietly either. Full body, shoulders shaking, crying. Partly because I was embarrassed at myself. Partly because I realized how much of my rage had been directed at the wrong thing. I wasn't angry at the world for not valuing me. I was angry because I'd internalized the belief that value was finite, that if someone else was struggling, it meant there was less to go around, that her poverty was somehow a threat to my future, that her invisibility in that deli, and she was invisible. Man, the way people were trying not to notice her, that her invisibility was a preview of mine. But here's what actually happened. She'd made me visible to myself, not as the guy trying to claw his way to the top, as a human being who had choices, who in that moment could choose to be someone who noticed people, someone who didn't need to perform confidence or superiority in order to feel like I occupied space, someone who could be small and still matter. That sounds very after school special, I know. Very neat and resolved. That's not what I'm saying. I didn't walk out of there a different person. I didn't suddenly become altruistic or wise. I'm still ambitious. I still wanted the Game of Thrones role when it came around a couple of years later. I still cared about recognition and respect. But something had shifted in how I was holding it all. The desperation had a different weight to it. It was no longer mixed with this poison of resentment toward everyone who didn't have what I was trying to get. I started thinking about something Dostoevsky wrote. I'd read Crime and Punishment in college. I got most of it. But there was this line that came back to me after that day. Something about how compassion is a harsh and dreadful thing compared to love and poetry, how it's a science instead of a feeling. And he's talking about how so much of what we call compassion is actually just not wanting to feel guilty. Real compassion, real visibility toward another person requires that you feel the discomfort of their reality without using it as an opportunity to prove something about yourself. That's what the woman had done for me, even though she didn't know it. She'd shown me that her struggle wasn't a referendum on my success. Her invisibility wasn't proof that I needed to become visible. They were just facts about her Tuesday afternoon. And my choice about how to respond to those facts said something about what kind of person I was choosing to be in the world. I went to that audition for the Chekhov adaptation. I didn't get the role. Someone taller got it. They literally told me that on the rejection call, which was refreshing in its honesty. But I remember the audition room differently than I usually did. I wasn't in there trying to convince anyone that I deserved to exist. I was in there offering them something I'd actually created, knowing they'd either connect with it or they wouldn't. It wasn't a referendum on my value. It was just an exchange of energy. I started saying yes to different kinds of conversations. I did a play in a tiny theater in Brooklyn with a director who didn't care about my size. He just cared that I could access the emotional truth of the character. I did a couple of guest spots on shows where the parts were written as fully realized humans, not as sidekicks or tokens. None of these things were prestigious. None of them were going to make my career. But they were clean, they felt honest, and I could do them without feeling like I was betraying some essential part of myself in order to pay rent. When Game of Thrones actually happened, when I got that role and the script started arriving and I realized I'd be playing a character who was complex and broken and furious and intelligent and absolutely fundamentally centered, I approached it completely differently than I would have if that moment in the daily had never happened. Because I understood by then that Tyrion wasn't supposed to convince anyone of anything. He was just supposed to be fully himself, which included being angry, which included having edges that didn't fit into anyone's comfortable narrative. And the audience responded to that, not because I was smaller, but because I was real, because I wasn't performing acceptance. I wasn't trying to be palatable or inspirational or any of those things. I was just taking up the space I took up and operating from inside it with complete commitment. The irony is that I think I only got access to that kind of authenticity because of that moment in the deli, because I'd had to confront the fact that desperation was rotting me from the inside and that the antidote wasn't success. It was remembering how to see people. The thing that stayed with me most was that phrase, "You must be a kind person." Not "you're a nice guy" or "thanks for that." The specificity of it. The way she'd identified something in me that I'd actually forgotten was there, because I had been kind once before. The ambition calcified into resentment. I've been the kind of person who could notice someone struggling and respond without needing credit for it. And somehow, in the scramble to become important, I'd buried that. Or I'd converted it into a transaction, into a thing I could do to buy credibility or prove my worth. I think that's what actually happened on that Tuesday afternoon in the deli. She didn't give me kindness. She gave me permission to remember that it had never been about the roles or the recognition or the money. It had always been about the possibility of mattering in the presence of another person. And that's a kind of mattering that doesn't require Hollywood or Emmy Awards or anyone's validation. You get to matter the moment. You decide to notice someone else's humanity as urgently as you notice your own. Years later, after all the success that did come, after the awards and the headlines, and the moments where I was supposedly secure, I'd find myself back in that deli sometime. Different location, usually different neighborhood, but the same basic script. Someone counting coins, someone trying not to be seen. And I think about that woman whose name I never learned, whose face I can't quite recall anymore, but whose presence I still carry with me. I think about how she probably has no idea that she changed someone's life that day. That a stranger cried on a bench because of her quiet courage in asking for crackers instead of soup. That's the strange thing about these moments. They're not about the dramatic recognition. They're not about the person you affected suddenly realizing their importance. They're about the ripple that moves through your own consciousness, the way one small act of human recognition can disrupt the story you've been telling yourself about what matters and what doesn't. I'm in my 50s now. I've had a career that includes things I'm genuinely proud of. I've got a wife and kids and a life that, from the outside, looks like the American version of success. But every time I catch myself grinding again, every time I feel that familiar tightening in my chest that says, I need to prove something to be worthy, I think about that deli, I think about the woman. I think about the moment I realized that kindness isn't something you earn by climbing high enough. It's something you access by staying low enough, by remembering that the person next to you is also just trying not to disappear. So here's what I actually know after all these years of living and working and failing and occasionally succeeding. The catalyst for change doesn't have to be grand. It doesn't have to be a dramatic moment or a big break or an opportunity that arrives in a three-piece suit. Sometimes it's just a stranger's eyes meeting yours in a moment of vulnerability and you realizing that you're looking at a mirror, that you're looking at the person you could become if you keep choosing resentment, or the person you could become if you choose to remember that we're all in this together, all trying, all frightened, all deserving of at least the basic acknowledgement that we exist. The woman with the crackers taught me that mattering isn't about being the biggest or the loudest or the most accomplished. It's about being awake. It's about being the kind of person who notices, who sees, Who remembers that every single human being carrying anxiety about money or health or invisibility is actually fully real? They're not background characters in the movie of your life. They're the main character in their own movie with a complete inner world and history and fear and hope. That shift from thinking of other people as either obstacles or opportunities to think of them as equally real, equally deserving of attention, that's not just a moral thing. It's actually the thing that made me better at my job. Because once I stopped needing to prove that my existence was justified, I could actually act. I could actually listen to see partners. I could actually be present instead of performing. And presence is the only thing that makes art matter. So if you're in that place where I was, where you're climbing and grinding and terrified of falling, where you're measuring your worth by external markers and wondering if you'll ever be enough, pay attention to the quiet moments. The moments when someone shows you their struggle without meaning to. When a stranger's vulnerability reminds you that you're not alone in this. When you realize that you have something you don't have to earn. You have the capacity to see people, to make them matter for a moment, to confirm that they exist. That's the real currency. That's the thing that doesn't run out. That's the thing that actually makes you matter. Believe that. And then live like it's true.